Let's possibly start off with you here and look at the platinum sector specifically. We've got labour and business still at loggerheads. Implats has raised its offer for one to between 7.5% and 8%, and we've had the unions lower its demands as well. But we're still very far from, where we need to be and meeting ground. So your assessment of negotiations that are taking place at Implats at this stage and the progress you're making?
Well, we are grateful of the fact that yesterday we've been able to make good progress. Good in the sense that if you look at the other areas, we had received a 5% increment on the minimum wage alone. But if you look at the basic wage increment, we have not been able to make a significant increase, because in the sense that we have seen Anglo-Platinum increased by a mere 1% from 7% to 8% for the lowest paid workers. And for the highest paid workers and the middle workers, we have seen an increment of 1.5% from 6 to 7.5. We strongly believe that we can still make sufficient progress today, provided there's willingness on the part of Anglo-Platinum, because on our side we are quite willing to lower what we have already lowered from 15% to 12.5% on the lowest paid workers.
How do negotiations there stand in contrast to what we're seeing play out in Implats? Because we've heard now that we're heading into a process of arbitration.
Well, at Impala, it's a different kettle of fish altogether, in the sense that if you look at Impala, they have given us 10% for the lowest paid workers for the 2 years. And they have also agreed on 9% for the 2 years, on 8% for the 2 years for the middle and highest paid workers respectively. However, the biggest challenge at Impala is the fact that we are not going to be reaching the minimum wages for this year. In other words, in terms of a minimum wage, we are not going to be reaching 5,000 rand, which we had hoped to achieve this year. That will be for next year. And that's where the bone of contention is.
Well, of course, contentious debate all round in terms of what we're seeing play out in wage negotiation season this year. Loane, your reading of the scenario where we've just touched on two still outstanding or negotiations that are still underway.
Well, if we take a look at the context, strikes and workdays lost due to strikes are 22% up this year over last year. And just to put that in context, there will be 18 million workdays lost this year. At the height of rolling mass action in the 1980s, there were never more than 9 million workdays lost. So we've had a doubling of industrial conflict in South Africa over the last 20 years. And I think this trend will continue. What does that mean for the economy in general, and maybe the platinum sector in particular? Well, if we take a lesson out of the gold sector, which for many years since the 70s conceded high wage demands in response to relatively low levels of productivity. I mean, the gold mining sector used to employ 4.2% of the total employed population. It now employs just 0.8%. So we're going to see the same result in the platinum sector, dwindling employment and escalating wages.
Certainly for the most part, Lesiba, that alarm is sounding, in terms of the dent this is going to have on economic growth and in turn the employment scenario in the country. What's your view on that scenario moving forward?
Well, it is a very sorry state of affairs. As a union, we do not want to see labor wars happening and labor unrest, but the reality of the matter is it takes two to tango. We are saying that the employers must be really prepared to share the wealth. And I think it's actually a myth to say that South African workers are generally unproductive, when we have seen in the past month alone, if you had looked at the results that were released by both Goldfields, by both Anglo Gold, as well as the result by De Beers, we have seen a significant improvement.
A lot of that, though, having to do with the rising commodity prices that have escalated those earnings.
Well, rising commodity prices alone could not ensure that the profits are higher. It also depends on production. If there's no production, the commodity prices can go high, and then that will have no positive feedback on the part of the on the part of the employers. The reality is that we are saying, let the employers also, negotiate in good faith with us. I mean, if you still have got workers at this time and age who are still earning below 5,000 Rand a month, it actually tells you that the employers are also not serious. If they negotiate in good faith, we are saying we are prepared to listen and say, how do we together strategically reposition South African mining industry as an investment destination of choice? And that we have agreed, by the way.
Yeah. Well, Loane, your response to that kind of rationale that's been put out on the table?
That's absolutely crazy. I mean, South Africa competes with other countries that produce metals and minerals. South Africa's mines have some of the lowest returns on capital invested in the world. Our labour is, particularly in the mining sector, is way overpriced. Managers have given away increases and escalations of wages over 25 years that are just totally out of sync with reality. I think managers need to get back to shareholders' interests. Workers are not entitled to a share of profits. Workers work for wages because they take none of the risks associated with business activity. Shareholders are entitled to profits, and of course they've got to cough up in lean times. So I think that what Lesiba is saying is just crazy.
Obviously, he's made mention of the fact that it comes down to the sharing of wealth, and in that regard, there's been much controversy around executive pay, for example. So, what kind of onus then is on employers themselves to basically come to the table and practice what they preach?
Well, South Africa has some of the best managers in the world. Our managers are highly sought after in the world. South Africans run some of the best enterprises in the world. Unfortunately, for many reasons, the best of South African managers have emigrated from South Africa. Immigration laws prevent us from importing the very best foreign high-skilled CEOs. So there are many reasons why CEO pay in South Africa has escalated. But there's no question that workers' salaries should be flat to rising at between 3 and 4%, the cost of living. Worker productivity throughout the economy is currently declining at about 4% per annum. Workers cannot get wage increases, let alone double-digit wage increases in those circumstances.
Why are you fighting for double-digit wage increases where we've got inflation sitting at around about 5%, Lesiba?
You see, if you look at your inflation, which is actually around 6%, and then you then have to look for real increment in the whole picture. And you look at the prices of food. You must just go to any supermarket, look at the cost of public transport. You see, and I think what actually makes us even more angry, and I think that in the years that are ahead, we are going to be even more crazier, as he's saying, because it is the attitude of the industry and the attitude of the so-called analysts that are funded by these companies that make us even more crazy. That's why there will never be labor peace in this industry, because if you approach us with a mentality that says you are less productive, you are nothing in this industry, we are the most important, this is actually what leads us into this kind of riots.
So let's put then, the mentality of labor under the spotlight, and unions specifically, because if we use an example like the kind of wage negotiations that are persisting at Eskom, I mean, we've seen employers there rejecting a 7% pay rise. We've got a company here that's not benefiting from higher commodity prices. It's certainly not profitable at this stage of the game, and passing on a lot of those costs to the consumer. And as those wage increases come through, it's going to be a full circle effect where consumers are going to, at the end of the day, bear the brunt. So how do you navigate around that kind of situation?
You see, when you talk about Eskom, you must put it in a context. The reality is that you get a parastatal that is given a 31% rise in terms of what we should pay as ratepayers. And then that eats into the little amount of money that we earn. And then in a sense, how do we then get to have electricity? It becomes problematic to us, because I'm saying you give me 6%, of 4,000 rand that I'm earning per month, and then you demand that I pay 31% increment for the supply of electricity, that becomes problematic.
But it also becomes problematic when the wage increases and electricity tariffs increase further as a result of those wage increases having taken place.
I agree, but the reality of the matter is then, should we then just shut up and say, okay, hit us with a 31% increment, give us a 2% increment, so that we find it even more difficult to make a living?
Loane, what is the answer?
Well,
it seems like a catch-22.
What I'd like to understand from Lesiba is why unions in South Africa are anti-productivity. In most parts of the world, unions have recognized the role that productivity plays. There's nothing wrong with wage increases and escalations of 8 or 10 or 12%, so long as they are matched by productivity gains. But we've seen time and time again unions resisting the introduction of performance appraisals in the government sector. We've seen unions throw out inspectors from classrooms, leaving teachers completely unevaluated. We've seen massive resistance to the idea that workers should be paid according to their productivity. And ultimately, productivity is what is part of the virtuous circle by which people acquire skills, they gain productivity, and their wages rise through their careers.
It's in fact something that we've seen come through with Royal Bafokeng's Platinum's wage negotiations, where there is a productivity issue, that gets taken into consideration, where they look at performance moving forward. Surely, Lesiba, that's an education that needs to happen in tandem with the kind of demands that are being put on the table in terms of what productivity means and where South Africa needs to be.
Well, I agree. In fact, I'm very surprised that Loane said initially that the South African managers are the most sought after, progressive and so on, because the issue of productivity lies squarely on the shoulders of managers. They must be able to lead their workforce to ensure that they perform. We are quite supportive of that. In fact, we have done far better in terms of supporting the issue of production. But also, when you talk about classrooms, unfortunately, we do not organize people who are in the classroom. But the reality of the matter, if you look at the teaching profession as well, government has introduced what is called the Integrated Quality Management System, which is a system that endeavors to measure productivity amongst the teachers. It is up to government to ensure that it implements that to the letter. And as unions, we have never been opposed to the issue of productivity and assessments. We are saying that if you are prepared to put all these systems into place, good. But you must also deliver on your part. When we say wages, you say you are not going to be able to deliver on the wages because we are merely delivering a service in the public sector. That becomes ridiculous.
Well,